Hello, welcome to Comic Tropes. I'm your host, Chris. You know, people are complicated. In our stories, our heroes can be conflicted and flawed, yet they ultimately get to be noble. But in real life, people have highs and they have lows. Today, I want to talk to you about a writer whose work I very much have enjoyed, but who may have plagiarized some stories. I want to talk to you about the work and the writing techniques of Bill Mantlo. I think his work is tremendously enjoyable in books like ROM Space Knight and The Incredible Hulk. But did he steal some stories along the way? That's a question that's up for healthy debate. And speaking of healthy, let's talk about this week's sponsor. A lot of the comments lately have noted that I've lost some weight, and it's true, I have. And I did that specifically by cutting out sugar and carbs. It's really not that difficult, but the one thing I really missed was breakfast cereal, something I loved. The colors, the flavors, it was all out until I discovered Magic Spoon. This stuff is not only healthy, it tastes delicious. And hey, just for the record, the CDC recommends that I have this. And to be clear, by CDC I mean Comics Described by Chris. I recommend giving myself a treat. Magic Spoon gives you the fun flavors you grew up with, but in a much healthier package. It's January. New year, new you. If you have any health or fitness-related New Year's resolution, but you aren't really sure where to start, you need to try Magic Spoon as a low-carb, high-protein, and 0 grams of sugar alternative. Folks, that's incredible, and it tastes delicious. You've got options like cocoa, peanut butter, frosted, and what's become my personal favorite, fruity. I started taking my health seriously when I was diagnosed as diabetic. That means that keto-friendly options fit my lifestyle, and Magic Spoon is helping with that. I'm proud to have them as a sponsor. Click the link below to get a variety pack and start fulfilling your health goals in the new year. And if you use the promo code COMICTROPES, you'll get $5 off your order. Or go to magicspoon.com/comictropes. Magic Spoon is so confident in their product, it's backed with a 100% happiness guarantee. So, if you don't like it for any reason, they'll refund you your money, no questions asked. So, click the link below and use the code COMICTROPES to get $5 off your order, or go to magicspoon.com/comictropes and you'll be able to get $5 off today. And now, let's talk about Bill Mantlo. Bill Mantlo was born and raised in Brooklyn. He attended both the Manhattan High School of Art and Design and Cooper Union for his college studies. He focused on painting and photography, but after graduation held various civil service positions. He broke into comics in 1974 when he networked into a job at Marvel Comics working as a production assistant under Jon Verpoorten. In a July 1979 interview that Mantlo gave to the Micronauts fanzine BEM, he explained how he broke in as a writer, saying, quote, "So one day, Tony Isabella, a Marvel writer and then editor of the Black and White line, rushed into Verpoorten's office in a panic and cried that he needed someone to script a Sons of the Tiger story for Deadly Hands of Kung Fu overnight. He'd plotted the job, which was drawn by then novice artist George Perez, but was caught in a deadline crunch and he couldn't script it. Jon Verpoorten, who delighted in torturing poor Tony, said he didn't have anyone who could turn in the job by the next day without screwing up their own schedules. Tony, he said, would have to do it himself. It was then that I heard myself say, almost involuntarily, 'Tony, I'll do it.' Tony looked at me incredulously. I mean, I was a paste-up man who just recently began coloring Marvel books, but Tony had the decency not to laugh, and he gave me the job. I scripted it overnight, turned it in the next day, and with very few editorial changes, it was accepted. The rest is history." Thus, Mantlo had a hand in co-creating comics' first superhero of Hispanic descent, the White Tiger. He also earned a reputation as a writer who would take whatever he was offered and turn it around quickly. He was in the right place at the right time. Editor-in-Chief Marv Wolfman had just instituted a new policy to create inventory issues for all the titles that could be used if a book was running late. Wolfman explained this in Back Issue Magazine number 103 that first hit stands in December of 2017. Wolfman said, quote, "I came up with a solution, and it began by creating a brand new title which I called Marvel Fill-In Comics. At my insistence, it was actually put on the schedule. I felt if there wasn't an actual deadline for the book, it would keep falling back and back on the schedule. Bill Mantlo was my writer of record. He was both good and fast, and at that point, didn't have a lot of regular assignments." Being the fill-in king meant Mantlo wrote for just about every Marvel character in the mid-70s, from Spider-Man to the X-Men. But he also ended up with books no one else had much interest in, like an adaptation of Battlestar Galactica, or Human Fly, based on a real-life stuntman who liked climbing buildings. So what was Bill Mantlo's writing like? I would call it a very organic extension of what readers had been used to with Stan Lee's 1960s stuff. I would say that Mantlo gave us good characterization, really interesting interpersonal drama, as well as clever dialogue. But when it came to plotting, I would say that it was very workmanlike, maybe pedestrian. By his own admission, it was not his strong suit, but he was writing fast, he was writing a lot of titles, and what he could do was make you care about the protagonist and build interesting worlds. A good example of what I'm talking about is one of Mantlo's earliest regular writing assignments on Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man. Mantlo had proven that he could write in Spider-Man's authentic voice in various issues of Marvel Team-Up, and he was given the assignment to work on Spider-Man's secondary title beginning in 1977. One of his best stories is an arc that runs from issues 72 all the way through 79, pitting Spider-Man against his arch-enemy, Dr. Octopus. Over the course of half a year's worth of stories, Dr. Octopus begins a plan for revenge against Spider-Man that starts as an attempt to consolidate power from fellow criminal Owl and steal a bomb from Kingpin. When a key component is stolen by the Black Cat, Dr. Octopus focuses on attacking her, and Spider-Man gets involved. Black Cat is put in the hospital, and Spider-Man rips Dr. Octopus's mechanical arms off of him. But by the next issue, the arms are reattached, and the villain targets the heroes for revenge. The battle escalates into an epic fight that goes through a hospital and then a train yard. Ultimately, Dr. Octopus brings down a construction site in an attempt to kill Spider-Man, but the hero actually saves his enemy from the collapsing debris, and as the police arrive, Spider-Man declares he will always be Dr. Octopus. So the plot is nothing too original or complex, but the build-up is fantastic, and we believe in the characters' motivations. The issues are peppered with interesting subplots, like a nerdy guy who looks up to Dr. Octopus as his hero, and he begins a mini crime wave of stealing comics, until a confrontation with Spider-Man turns him around. There is a story about Spider-Man's alter ego Peter Parker deciding how best to help his friend Deb, who is seeing a psychiatrist and is convinced she knows Peter is Spider-Man. Rather than keep his secret, he willingly reveals his identity to Deb to assure her that she is not crazy. It may not have revolutionized the status quo, but it's all breezy, fun reading. Another thing Bill Mantlo tended to do in his stories was create lots of new characters. Now this is a big deal because at the time, everything was work for hire. So if you created a character, that meant Marvel owned it completely. Still, Mantlo seemed to have no problem creating and giving away these characters. And even if you don't think you've read any of Bill Mantlo's comics, there's an excellent chance you have been exposed to some of his characters either in other comic books or possibly in TV or film. An early example is Rocket Raccoon. You may have seen him in the Guardians of the Galaxy or Avengers movies, but Mantlo first introduced Rocket as a co-creation with artist Keith Giffen in the pages of Marvel Preview number 7 from 1976. It was a black and white fantasy, sci-fi story where Rocket simply showed up to help a hero in a strange land. Rocket next showed up in the Marvel Universe proper in issue 271 of The Incredible Hulk as part of Mantlo's 5-year-long run on that title. Another set of fairly iconic characters was introduced in 1982's Spectacular Spider-Man issue 64. Artist Ed Hannigan co-created the teen runaway superhero's cloak and dagger with Mantlo in that comic. The origin was that they were runaways, but were kidnapped by organized crime to test a new synthetic drug on. It killed most of the kids, but Cloak and Dagger survived and got powers and vowed to stop drug trafficking. Simple but effective. Wow, one of his creations was a talking animal? That's absurd. And yet, it's also his most popular creation. In a similarly ironic bit of history, Bill Mantlo is likely best remembered to most of his fans for the comics he wrote that were not based on Marvel Comics characters, but on licensed toys that were set in the world of Marvel. The two series Mantlo is likely best known for came out 11 months apart, Micronauts and ROM Space Knight. The first one, Micronauts, was based on the toy line Micronauts, which Mego released from 1976 through 1980. They in turn were licensed from the Japanese toy line Microman, which Takara began producing in 1974. These were 3.75-inch figures that were robots and aliens, but there was no real storyline for the American release. Bill Mantlo explained to the BEM fanzine how he came up with the idea to make a comic based on the toys. Quote, "My son got a few of the Mego Micronaut toys for Christmas in 1977. I thought they had great potential and wrote a proposal detailing the directions I foresaw for these tiny aliens from a subatomic microverse and handed it to Jim Shooter. Jim apparently liked the idea because he got in touch with Stan and they got in touch with Mego. The idea went through and Jim gave me the go-ahead to develop the characters, to write a treatment." While the toys all got personalities and roles, Mantlo also added original characters, including Commander Arcturus Ron, Princess Marionette, and Warrior Bug. The series lasted 59 issues, and a 5-year run is always solid. The story took place in the Microverse, a smaller dimension where the evil Baron Karza had ruled the planet Homeworld for 1,000 years. His twisted science created the body banks, which allowed the wealthy to prolong their lives and for him to create monstrous warriors. Commander Ron returned from a deep space mission, having been in hypersleep for a millennia, to return to a homeworld run by a despot. He assembled a team and fought back, and the story had Star Wars-esque space opera drama. Occasionally, the heroes would enter the Marvel Universe, where they were proportionate to their actual toys. Mantlo played with the interpersonal drama, building the world, and the origins of the Microverse and of Baron Karza, and even had main characters fall in battle. Today, Hasbro owns the rights to the characters and world of Micronauts, but Marvel has the rights to Bill's original contributions, characters like Bug, Captain Universe, and the microscopic realm that they have to now call the Quantum Realm, as Hasbro owns the term Microverse. Because Mantlo was having success on Micronauts, as well as Marvel having success with licensed properties like Star Wars, Marvel decided to next adapt the toy ROM from Parker Brothers into a comic, and Mantlo was the first choice. The toy was a fairly basic robot without much to it, but Mantlo launched ROM Space Knight and guided it even longer than Micronauts for 75 issues, until its cancellation in 1986. Sal Buscema drew almost the entire series. ROM was a human-looking alien from Galador who volunteered to be turned into a cyborg to protect his people from the dire wraiths, shape-shifting, warlike aliens. Eventually, ROM's hunt for their remaining forces brings him to Earth, where the dire wraiths exist hidden within society. ROM's neutralizer weapon can banish them to a limbo dimension, but bystanders believe he is simply going around killing people. His companion on Earth becomes Brandy, who learns of ROM's true mission and purpose and assists him. The series was set within the Marvel Universe and featured plenty of crossovers. It was a great mix of sci-fi action and also paranoia, as anyone could secretly be the enemy. Mantlo's work on Micronauts and ROM paved the way for later successful licensed toy comics like G.I. Joe and Transformers. One of my favorite elements was that both stories were set in non-traditional locations. When the Micronauts entered the real world, they were in the middle of Florida. When ROM landed, he was in West Virginia. Both Micronauts and ROM had lengthy runs, and the passion from both the creators and the readers was real. In my opinion, both of those comics hold up very, very well, and probably a big part of that was that the toy companies weren't forcing Marvel to include lots and lots of new characters. So instead, Bill Mantlo really got to build both of those worlds from the ground up. It was very hands-off, and he got to do what he wanted. I think that there's a lot of fun and a lot of charm there. It was very successful, but of course, success brings its own challenges. Bill Mantlo was regarded as a fast writer. He was writing as many as 8 titles in a single month at times. So, did he actually steal some of his plots in that sort of race against time? Well, there are accusations. That's what we're going to discuss next. We're going to take a look at an Iron Man issue from 1979 and then 2 Hulk issues from 1983 and 1985. The accusation of stealing the story for Iron Man 100 comes from Jim Shooter's blog in a post from June 20th of 2011. Shooter writes, quote, "If anyone is interested, they can check Bill's Iron Man number 100 against one of Archie Goodwin's Iron Man stories featuring the Mandarin. Issue 50, maybe? I don't know. Archie was editor of the black and white magazines at that time, and I was associate editor of the color line. Archie, who seldom complained about anything, came to me and asked how I could possibly have allowed Bill to rip off his story like that. He was seriously upset. The answer was that I hadn't read Archie's story, published years earlier, and didn't know Bill's was a carbon copy." That said, it's clear that Shooter is writing from memory because none of these details line up. Issue 50 was not by Archie Goodwin and did not feature the Mandarin. Nothing near that issue did either. The closest I can find is issues 10 and 11 by Goodwin. Those feature Mandarin, but it certainly doesn't seem like any plagiarism to me. In Mantlo's story, Mandarin teleports Iron Man to his base. However, unknown to him, the man wearing the Iron Man suit is being worn by a man named Michael O'Brien. Tony Stark dons an old Iron Man suit to rescue him, and in a battle against the Mandarin, uses magnets to pull Mandarin's powerful rings off of his fingers. In Goodwin's story, Mandarin has learned that Tony Stark is Iron Man, so he creates some fake images of Tony Stark being friendly with communist leaders in order to ruin his business. Meanwhile, Stark creates a robot duplicate of himself and puts on a rubber mask to trick Mandarin into thinking he's wrong about Iron Man's identity. I don't find these stories anything alike, personally. It's certainly possible that Mantlo stole a story, but looking at this, from the issues of Iron Man that I've read, I couldn't find the similarities. From looking online, I couldn't find any reviews or recaps that refer to any plagiarism or copying. So I think we have to clear Mantlo on this one, barring any further evidence. The next story, based on issue 286 of The Incredible Hulk, is more clear. The story features a time-traveling soldier coming back from the future. He's from a world at war, and his futuristic helmet compels him to keep fighting. But when he appears in the modern day, the Hulk is able to subdue him. Marvel published a correction 3 issues later explaining that the story was an adaptation of a Harlan Ellison story, and that Marvel forgot to include the credit. The short story, Soldier from Tomorrow, was adapted into a 1964 episode of the show The Outer Limits, titled simply Soldier. Even the visuals from that show look pretty similar to the soldier, weaponry, and time travel effect used in the Hulk issue. It's worth noting that Harlan Ellison successfully sued production company Orion for using this story as the basis for the movie The Terminator, which came out a year after the issue of the Hulk. Editor-in-Chief Jim Shooter has issued 2 explanations for what happened. In his 2011 blog post, Shooter said that the editors didn't catch that Mantlo had swiped the Ellison story, and Ellison called up angry, but was willing to settle for a credit, the pay for an issue of scripting, and a lifetime supply of future Marvel comics. However, back in 1987, in issue 115 of the Comics Journal, Jim Shooter spoke about the same thing, and he gave a very different story there, saying that it was always intended to be an adaptation of Harlan Ellison, and it was just a last-minute mistake that dropped the credit off. And I have to say, I think that makes a lot more sense for 2 reasons. One, that was told much closer to the events in question, so I think everybody's memory is a lot fresher. 2, Harlan Ellison was never shy about controversy or talking about drama, and I can't find any examples of him really complaining about this. So, personally, I think that this was just the case of a production mix-up, and it was always intended to be an adaptation. Finally, in issue 312 of The Incredible Hulk from October of 1985, a key event in Hulk's story entered into his continuity. Mantlo wrote a story that was a flashback to Bruce Banner's childhood, showing that his father was abusive. The constant abuse, culminating in a ruined Christmas dinner, shows us Bruce had always had the Hulk personality, even before he was bombarded with gamma rays. It was the first story that opened up the idea that Bruce Banner has dissociative identity disorder, and that the Hulk is one of his alters. But the story was originally created by Barry Windsor Smith, apparently. The story goes that Windsor Smith had that very story to tell, and he had brought in dozens of pages to make sure Marvel would be interested in publishing it. Shooter's blog confirms that they were interested, and Windsor Smith continued to create his epic story, having left photocopies of his pages thus far with the editors. Apparently, Bill Mantlo must have seen these at one point and adapted the story for issue 312 of Hulk. This apparently infuriated Windsor Smith. Just last year, Windsor Smith finally released his version of the story, Monster, a massive graphic novel over 30 years in the making. The story is much bigger, and it goes into the story of an abusive husband and father. It shows a family Christmas dinner ruined. It also includes what happened to the father in World War II that changed him. Additionally, Windsor Smith's story shows us the effects on a military family that helped recruit the abused kid into scientific experiments to create a super soldier, which turned out to be a mess. It's a beautiful looking but heartbreaking story. Now, this one, we can actually see the two things side by side and see that Mantlo must have taken Windsor Smith's idea. We have to take Windsor Smith and editors like Shooter at their word that there were already pages created for this, but I think that's a very reasonable thing to believe. Now, no editors stopped Mantlo from writing this story or from it being published. How did that part happen? Well, the editors on Hulk had changed just before this story was published, so it's possible that new editor Carl Potts was not familiar with the Windsor Smith pitch. So, was it stolen? I think it's definitely possible and honestly probable that Bill Mantlo did take Barry Windsor Smith's story in this case. I think that this probably is plagiarism. Here's the thing, it's possible that Bill Mantlo saw those pages and could have assumed that it was already a published story and that that was already part of Hulk's continuity, but I have a hard time wrapping my head around that particular theory. Unfortunately, we will never get to know for sure because we won't get to hear Bill Mantlo's side of the story. His story is about to take a very tragic turn. Bill Mantlo continued to write for Marvel into the 1980s, but took advantage of a college tuition program they had. Beginning in 1985, Marvel funded Mantlo's further studying, and he earned a law degree in 1987. One of the first things Mantlo did was take Marvel into arbitration because he said Jim Shooter was refusing to give him the amount of work they were obligated to provide him. Another thing he did as a lawyer was assist Colleen Doran in regaining the rights to her comic A Distant Soil. He then became a public defender. On July 17, 1992, Mantlo was rollerblading to his Brooklyn apartment while coming home from work. A car struck him in a hit and run. Mantlo was not wearing a helmet. The end result was a severe head injury that also severed his brainstem. Mantlo has been in 24-hour nursing home care ever since. Without going into the full sad details, Bill Mantlo can no longer focus on anything or move without assistance or communicate with more than a word or two. By all accounts, he now spends his days sleeping or sitting all day, though his family does visit him. It's been that way for almost 30 years. This is certainly not an event we would wish on anyone. As to whether Bill Mantlo took other people's stories, it's very much up for debate. I know where I fall, and I've laid that out for you. I've laid out my argument, but I'm definitely curious to hear your thoughts down below. Before we leave, though, I have a few more things about Bill Mantlo I want to talk about, and let's just start with a look at his writing style from the viewpoint of his close friend, Chris Claremont, who's also an acclaimed writer for his 16-year run on X-Men, among other things. Claremont said, quote, "He was one of the writers who thought that comics should be more than just guys in skin-tight suits hitting each other and saving the world. He was asking, what kind of a world are we trying to save? What kind of lessons can we impart to our young and impressionable readership? The trick was to find a way to do it so that you're not preaching, but you're also telling a cracking good story that will make the reader turn the page and bring the reader back next issue so you can have an ongoing and more lasting effect." Bill did that. I think that Bill Mantlo's writing is very fun, maybe breezy at times, but not always. I think that it is possibly underrated. I think that there can be a lot of fun involved with his work because specifically if you look at things like ROM and Micronauts, not humongous runs to collect, but also not the easiest thing to collect because as licensed books, they've never been collected into trade paperbacks and you can't get them today on, say, a digital app or anything like that. So that means that you get the fun of going to comic book stores and conventions and actually digging through the back issues to assemble a full run. I think that that's a fun part of comics, not just the reading, but actually assembling a complete run. That's something that you can do with things like Micronauts and ROM specifically. Anyway, a complex story, a complicated story, or at least a question there. You know, was this stuff plagiarized? Possibly one of the three stories, and maybe there were other stories that he did crib notes on. I would love to find more information on that. If you have an opinion one way or the other, I'd love to hear that in the comments below. Thank you all for doing things like that lately. There have been a lot of comments, a lot of likes, and a lot of subscription on the channel lately. It's been growing very, very healthily. I sincerely appreciate that. It means everything to me. So thank you all of you for doing that. Thank you to this episode's sponsor, and a supreme thanks to my patrons out there. You guys really do make this happen. I will see you next week, and until then, keep reading comics. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, please consider hitting like and subscribe. If you'd like to support the show, there are merchandise links beneath the YouTube video, and you can always hit join on YouTube or visit Comic Tropes on Patreon to get access to special perks.